We now move to the next item of business, which is a statement by John Swinney on the draft budget 2014-15. The Cabinet Secretary will take questions at the end of his statement, and there should therefore be no interventions or interruptions. I call John Swinney, Cabinet Secretary. You've got 20 minutes.
Presiding Officer, I am pleased to set out today the Scottish Government's draft budget for 2014-15 and indicative spending plans for 2015-16. This is a budget focused on delivering investment, protecting household incomes and creating jobs. It is a budget that values our public services, the people that work for them and what they achieve. It is a budget that provides opportunities for our young people and security of care for our older people. And most of all, it is a budget that demonstrates the benefits of decisions being made here by those who care most about the future of the people of Scotland. Scotland is a wealthy and a productive nation. We have paid more in tax per head in each of the last 30 years than the rest of the United Kingdom. Excluding oil, our national income is on a par with the UK. Including oil, our GDP per head is 18% higher than for the UK. When compared with the OECD countries, our GDP per head would be the 8th highest. We have a highly skilled workforce, a long-standing reputation for innovation, a respected and recognisable brand, world-class universities and sectors and companies competing at the highest level across international markets. With the full decision-making powers of independence, I should today be able to present a budget that puts all of that economic strength to use in building a more prosperous and a more just Scotland. Instead, as a result of Westminster's decisions, I must today present a budget constrained by significant cuts. The UK spending round reduced the Scottish Government's fiscal dell by 10.9% in real terms over the period 2010-11 to 2015-16, and with further cuts expected for 2016-17 and 2017-18. Within that, our conventional capital budget will be reduced by 26.6%. Westminster's programme of welfare cuts is taking money out of the Scottish economy, adding to the burden on our public services and hitting household budgets. Despite this, the decisive and distinctive measures we have taken in Scotland are delivering results. Since my last budget, Scottish GDP statistics have shown growth in each quarter, with annual growth of 1.2% compared to just 0.3% for the UK as a whole. Employment has risen by 45,000 over the year, and our employment rate of 72.4% is higher than the UK's of 71.6%. Unemployment is down 19,000, and our unemployment rate at 7.4% is lower than the UK's of 7.7%. Youth unemployment is down 12,000 over the year, and our youth employment rate of 57.2% is higher than the UK equivalent at 49.8%. The Bank of Scotland PMI index for August indicated that private sector output has expanded for the 11th month and is rising at the fastest rate since the survey began. Scotland's recovery is not happening because of austerity, as the Chancellor claims. Recovery is taking place in spite of austerity. We cannot, Presiding Officer, however, take recovery for granted and must be focused on addressing real challenges in the economy. We will face these challenges from a position of strong financial management and responsibility. I have brought a balanced budget to Parliament each year since 2007, meeting our commitments and delivering value for money for the taxpayer. We continue to drive efficiency, with the Scottish Futures Trust helping deliver savings in our capital programme, and public bodies expected to deliver annual efficiencies of 3%. In 2015-16, we will use our capital borrowing powers of up to £296 million to support our investment programme. We will apply the Land and Buildings Transaction Tax and the Landfill Tax, which I hope Parliament agrees this session. In 2014-15, I have made provision for the costs of the referendum on independence and the costs of implementing the Scotland Act 2012. Presiding Officer, I will now set out for Parliament the actions we are taking to deliver economic recovery, reform our public services and support Scotland's people, businesses and communities. Our spending plans are focused on accelerating economic recovery through investment. To tackle Westminster's cuts to capital spending, we are switching funding from resource to capital, utilising capital receipts and pursuing revenue-financed investment through the NPD programme and the regulatory asset-based rail enhancements. We do so while committing no more than 5% of our future total DEL budget on the costs of our revenue-funded investment programme. I have published today an update on these projects and expected investment through this year, through to 2022-23. In the short term, NPD investment is lower than originally forecast. This is for two reasons. Firstly, some NPD projects are being concluded at lower cost. Secondly, some projects are taking longer to be prepared and planned. The benefit of taking time to properly prepare projects is clear from the example of the Queensferry crossing, which will be delivered on time and within a cost estimate that since 2011 has reduced by £145 million. Work continues on time and on budget on the £842 million new South Glasgow Hospitals project and major refurbishment programmes across the health service. The Schools for the Future programme will deliver 67 new schools across Scotland, 11 of which are already complete and operational. Construction is underway in Glasgow and Inverness colleges. Almost £2 billion worth of projects are in procurement, and of these, over £500 million of projects are expected to begin construction this financial year in the Ayrshire College, the M8, M73, M74 project bundle, and a range of schools and community health projects. The effects of the recession are still being felt in the housing market, and the Government is determined to do all that we can to help. We will support the construction industry and private house building through a range of schemes, including the My New Home Mortgage Indemnity Scheme and through our £120 million Help to Buy Scotland scheme, providing access to affordable mortgages for home buyers. And we are on track to deliver 30,000 affordable homes by 2016, of which at least 20,000 will be for social rent. When the Parliament approved the budget bill in February this year, I set out plans to invest £859 million in affordable housing over the period 2012-13 to 2014-15. I intend to revise those provisions today. Over the 3 years to 2014-15, we now plan to invest not £859 million, but £970 million, and in 2015-16 we will invest a further £390 million. I can therefore confirm to Parliament that over the 4-year period to 2015-16, this Government will drive investment in affordable housing of more than £1.35 billion in total. Presiding Officer, together with the other elements of our programme, we will secure total investment of more than £8 billion in Scotland's infrastructure over the next 2 years. This budget takes action to boost employment, to create economic opportunities and enhance business confidence. Our plans are supported by the unique opportunities presented next year, when Scotland will welcome visitors from around the world to the Commonwealth Games, the Ryder Cup and the second year of homecoming. We will invest £24 million in 2015-16 to establish a national performance centre to help us sustain the legacy of the Commonwealth Games. These effects will benefit Scottish business. We are taking significant steps to support private sector growth and ensure that we offer the most business-friendly environment in the UK. All of our communities benefit from the Small Business Bonus Scheme and the most generous set of business rates relief in the UK, worth over £560 million each year. Our enterprise bodies will support business growth, including through the Scottish Investment Bank and the SME Growth Fund, and we will resource innovative measures to encourage a new age of entrepreneurship across Scotland. Digital technologies offer huge potential to improve productivity and to open up new markets. The budget confirms a range of investment in digital technologies, including more than £280 million in 2 major contracts with BT, to ensure 95% of premises in Scotland have access to superfast broadband by the end of 2017-18, exceeding our earlier target. The transition to a low-carbon economy is a key theme of our economic strategy. We will provide £200 million over the next 2 years for schemes such as the National Renewables Infrastructure Fund, amongst others. and given the impact on investment of uncertainty over the UK energy policy, I will extend the Renewable Energy Investment Fund by a further year to 2015-16. In launching the second report on proposals and policies in June, the Minister for the Environment told Parliament that we would use the budget to boost investment in meeting our world-leading climate change targets. The budget confirms we will maintain the Sustainable Action Fund for the next 2 years, invest an additional £15 million in peatland restoration, deliver over £50 million investment in the Warm Homes Fund, a full year ahead of previous plans, enabling faster progress in delivering greater energy efficiency, and work with the private sector to secure around £200 million of measures to tackle fuel poverty. The budget also confirms that we will deliver around £40 million of investment in sustainable transport through the Future Transport Fund over the next 2 years. We will increase funding to support active travel. This will see an additional £20 million invested in cycling compared to the last budget, and in total, our support for active travel over the next 2 years compared to the last two will rise from around £40 million to around £60 million. A focus on education and training is fundamental to our efforts to support the economy and create the conditions for growth. We will extend funding for the 25,000 modern apprenticeships per year into 2015-16. We will continue to fund opportunities for all, guaranteeing support for all of Scotland's 16 to 19-year-olds not currently in education, employment or training. Free higher education will continue for Scottish students as part of annual investment of more than £1 billion in the sector. And this budget secures the position of our colleges for the remainder of this Parliament. In February, I confirmed to Parliament that we would provide resource funding of £522 million for colleges in 2013-14 and maintain that level in 2014-15. This budget delivers on that commitment. However, it also goes further. I confirmed today that the college's resource budget will increase to £526 million in 2015-16, supporting full-time courses and equipping Scotland's students for the world of work. We will also act to remove barriers to the labour market, particularly for women. We will invest over £190 million in the next 2 years to fund the Children and Young People Bill. This will provide an additional 125 hours of early learning and childcare for all 3- and 4-year-olds and looked-after 2-year-olds, worth around £700 to a family. Real practical help is being offered to hard-pressed families making their way in the world. Presiding Officer, our support for households is an integral part of our support for the economy. It is an approach that is in line with the values of the people of Scotland and demonstrates the priority that we attach to helping the most vulnerable. Despite the financial pressures that we face, I can give a clear and unequivocal commitment that NHS prescriptions, eye tests and personal care will remain free, the concessionary bus travel scheme will be maintained, the education maintenance allowance and from 2014-15 a minimum income for students will be available, and access to higher education will remain based firmly on the ability to learn, not the ability to pay. Our public services are vital to the people of Scotland. We value the NHS just as we believe that local government should be properly funded to deliver local services. This draft budget delivers in full the Barnett consequentials for the NHS revenue budget in both 2014-15 and 2015-16, securing continuing improvement in the quality of service the NHS provides. In England, the Chancellor's austerity drive has seen the local government settlement hit with a real terms cut of 18.6% since 2012-13. That reduction is passed on to Scotland through the Barnett formula. In contrast, local authorities in Scotland will see their resource funding from the Scottish Government maintained in 2014-15 and 2015-16, enabling them to maintain teacher numbers in line with pupil numbers and to deliver the council tax freeze, just as the Government promised that it would do. Along with protecting our vital public services, we are also intensifying our approach to public service reform. Alongside this draft budget, I am publishing an agreement on joint working, which places clear expectations on the public sector to work together to ensure that resourcing decisions are focused on the local priorities of each community planning partnership and that budgets are shared. We will fully fund in 2014-15 the 3 change funds announced in the spending review, supporting efforts to reshape care for older people, drive progress in early years and reduce reoffending. We will support the crucial role the third sector can play in each of these areas. Next year, we will invest £8.5 million in the 4th year of the Early Years Change Fund, and we will extend for a further year the Reducing Reoffending Change Fund that is helping to deliver the lowest reconviction rate in 14 years. We will build on the Reshaping Care for Older People Fund by allocating £100 million through NHS boards accessible to local authorities, the third sector and others to drive the shift towards prevention in 2015-16. £20 million will also be deployed to support national initiatives, meaning that we will invest £120 million in 2015-16 to assist the integration of adult health and social care services. Our Public Services and Reform programme depend on the hard work of public sector workers. Since 2010, they have been subject to pay restraint. I am publishing today a pay policy for 2014-15 and 2015-16, which sets out distinct differences with the approach taken by Westminster, particularly in relation to low-paid workers. We will implement the Scottish Living Wage and we will uprate it annually. We will increase the minimum uplift in basic pay for employees earning less than £21,000 from £250 to £300 each year. As a result, some staff will receive increases of up to 2%. And we flatly reject the Chancellor's threat to end pay progression. The Scottish Government will retain our existing policy, leaving public sector employers with the discretion to reach their own agreement with staff and trade unions and to do so outside the 1% cap that will apply to basic pay increases. The costs of Westminster's approach to public finances are increasingly borne by the most vulnerable in our society. From 2010 to 2015, their cuts to welfare benefits will take an estimated £4.5 billion out of the Scottish economy, widening the gap between rich and poor. The Scottish Government has neither the legal powers nor the financial resources to meet every cut or to mitigate all the damage done by Westminster. Last year, I announced that, working with our partners in local government, we would act to protect over 500,000 people in receipt of council tax benefit who would otherwise have struggled to pay their bills each month as a result of a Westminster decision to cut funding for successor arrangements to council tax benefit by 10%. In 2014-15, the Scottish Government will again contribute £23 million to mitigate the funding gap, and we propose to continue to work with our partners in local government to bring that support up to £40 million. This will ensure that we are able to maintain support for vulnerable groups through our council tax reduction scheme. In 2013-14, we set up the Scottish Welfare Fund and provided funding for 1 year. As people continue to struggle, I can confirm that we will maintain the fund at £33 million in both 2014-15 and 2015-16. We have already provided funding of £7.9 million for advice services to meet the additional demand Westminster's cuts have caused, with £2.5 million to help social landlords provide support to those affected by the bedroom tax. And we will provide a further £2.5 million to build the capacity of local communities and the voluntary sector to respond to the worst effects of welfare reform. This Government will use the resources we have, resources intended for devolved public services, to invest £68 million in each of the next 2 years to limit the damage of Westminster's welfare cuts. Today, the United Nations Special Rapporteur, who is investigating housing in the UK, has called for the bedroom tax to be abolished in light of its dire impacts. We agree, and with independence we will abolish the bedroom tax. In the interim, we will continue to press the UK Government to abolish this tax and to increase the support for those hardest hit. We do not have legal or financial powers over welfare benefits, but neither are we a government that will walk by on the other side. Last week, Shelter Scotland put forward a proposition that focused on the problems people are facing as a result of the bedroom tax. To wait until the start of next year's budget would be too late for many of those currently struggling to make ends meet. I intend to take immediate steps to deal with the iniquitous effect of the bedroom tax. I have considered Shelter's proposal, and I have looked at what capacity there is in this year's budget to meet that need. Using resources from savings in my own enterprise portfolio budget and underspend on home energy efficiency from within the fuel poverty budget caused by delays with UK energy schemes, I can confirm that the Scottish Government will invest up to £20 million this financial year to help those struggling the most with the costs of the bedroom tax. This funding will enable local authorities to add to their own provisions to increase discretionary housing payments to meet some of the implications of the bedroom tax. Presiding Officer, our action on the bedroom tax shows the values and priorities that matter in this Parliament. Where Westminster decisions have cut spending, this budget supports investment and job creation. Where Westminster decisions have reduced incomes, this budget delivers a social wage that supports our people. Where Westminster decisions are driving the privatisation of public services, this budget protects our NHS. And when Westminster targets the most vulnerable as part of its austerity drive, we will do all that we can to protect them. This budget makes clear the benefits of decisions being made here in Scotland by those who care most about our future. That is the opportunity on offer to the people of Scotland in 2014. I commend this budget to Parliament.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Thank you. We now move to questions on issues raised in the statement and tend to allow around 40 minutes for questions and answers, after which we'll move on to the next item of business. It would be helpful if members who wish to ask a question of the Cabinet Secretary to press the request to speak now, and I call Ian Gray.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and thanks to the Cabinet Secretary for early sight of his statement. Indeed, even earlier than that, the Cabinet Secretary sent his spin doctors out to brief that this would be a budget for independence. Honesty at last. Then we heard that an extra 10,000 Scots, an extra 32,000 young Scots have just joined the dole queues. And even the Cabinet Secretary realised that a budget for independence was the wrong priority, so he has dropped the slogan. But it is the same budget. It is a budget for independence. A don't rock the referendum boat budget for a Scotland at a standstill on pause. It is the wrong priority. Yesterday, a committee of this Parliament heard first-hand of the hardship faced by tenants who are victims of the bedroom tax. And I agree with the Cabinet Secretary on the iniquity of this tax. But I think those tenants, their priority might have been a budget to banish the bedroom tax from Scotland. Instead, Mr Swinney has found less than half the funds needed for the bedroom tax this year, in order to hide the fact that his budget itself has no provision at all to help next year. That means that councils will have to prioritise between the deserving and undeserving victims of the bedroom tax, and those are the wrong priorities. And next year, there is currently no promise of further help. So I simply say to Mr Swinney, this is, after all, a first draft of his budget. Will he take this budget for independence away and bring back a real budget for jobs and a budget which banishes the bedroom tax from Scotland this year, next year and the year after as well?
Cabinet Secretary. Cabinet Secretary.
I always find myself pointing out the fundamental incoherence of Ian Gray's arguments that he puts forward. But I don't understand how Scotland can be on pause when we have taken action today to do what we can within our powers to deal with and tackle the bedroom tax, and Ian Gray would serve his party better by unreservedly welcoming what the government has set out to do. And the reason why there is no provision in the 14-15 budget for dealing with the bedroom tax is I have absolutely no intention of letting the Westminster Government off the hook in 2014-15. It is the Westminster Government that has legislated for the bedroom tax, and whether the Labour Party is committed to getting rid of the bedroom tax, I watched 2 television programmes on Thursday night, and one Labour spokesman said yes, and the other Labour spokesman said no. So before the Labour Party comes here and tries to lecture me about the bedroom tax, I suggest they get some coherence into their argument and back us on the steps we are taking to tackle the iniquitous effect of the bedroom tax on the people of Scotland.
Gavin Brown, followed by Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I also thank the Cabinet Secretary for advanced sight of his statement. Today's budget should have been about the economy, particularly on a day when we find that 10,000 more people are unemployed in Scotland. But as far as the economy is concerned, this is a budget that has both under-promised and under-delivered. There was some encouraging news on the economy over the past couple of weeks. That, coupled with today's announcement, though, means it should have been a direct focus on the economy. So why, I have to ask the Cabinet Secretary, does he penalise business? Tucked away at the back of his budget on page 163, business rates go up from £2.4 billion this year to over £2.8 billion in 15-16. Almost £450 million extra coming out the pockets of business. Is this an idea? Is this an example of the benefits of decision-making being made here? How does he explain that on top of the retail levy and the empty property tax that he brought in? He talks about colleges, Presiding Officer. They used to get £560 million. This year they get 522. That's a pretty big drop. But because they're going up to 526 the year after, he says in his document, the funding floor has been increased. How on earth does going from 560 to 526 amount to an increase? And finally, how does he justify in these difficult economic times giving £115 million to Scottish Water in 2014-15 and £120 million in 2015-16? £235 million, Presiding Officer, that could be far better spent on capital projects across Scotland. This is a big disappointment, today's budget. If it was a film, Presiding Officer, it would have gone straight to DVD.
Sorry, Cabinet Secretary.
It was meant to be funny. It didn't impress anybody. I know. So, Mr Brown will have to keep practising, I think, on that one. Can I say that I find Mr Brown's narrative on the economy quite surprising, because I went through with considerable care in my statement some objective data over the last 12 months since I last delivered a budget to this Parliament on the performance of the Scottish economy. And just to reinforce the point, Scottish GDP growing at a higher rate than the rest of the United Kingdom, employment at a higher rate than the rest of the United Kingdom, unemployment lower than the rest of the United Kingdom, youth employment at a higher rate than the rest of the United Kingdom. And a Bank of Scotland Purchasing Managers Index, which was published on Monday, which I thought was a very encouraging indication of the attitudes of people within the business community about conditions within the business, within the Scottish economy. I would have therefore thought that with all that evidence, Mr Brown would have given due credence to the fact that the government's economic strategy was having the effect that we set out 12 months ago that it would actually do in the circumstances. Now, on the question of business rates, I would simply ask Mr Brown if he's forgotten about the concept of inflation. Business rates every September are uprated in line with inflation. And if he needs to have an explanation about the increased business rate take that is happening in Scotland, if he wants a comparator for that, he need only look at the rest of the United Kingdom, where business rates are rising in largely the same kind of fashion because of the inflation uplift as is happening here in Scotland. On colleges, well, Mr Brown frequently comes to Parliament and argues that we should reform the public sector. And when we reform the public sector, what does Mr Brown do? Mr Brown complains about it. And when we save money as a consequence of reforming the college sector, while still providing the same full-time equivalent and the deep courses that people require to get into the labour market, I don't know what he's complaining about. And finally, on the question of Scottish Water, I know Mr Brown sometimes he comes to Parliament and is driven by the ideological arguments of his side of the debate. And it's an ideological argument about privatising Scottish Water, and I don't accept it. I'm on the other side of the argument, because I look at the benefits that customers, the length and breadth of Scotland, have experienced by improvements in the quality of service and reductions in costs that are good for the charge payers here in Scotland, and I think the approach and strategy, not to mention the enormous capital investment that's happening, the length and breadth of the country, not least of which in the city of Glasgow that the Deputy First Minister represents, is a tribute to the capital investment programme of Scottish Water.
Kenneth Gibson, to be followed by Willie Rennie.
Presiding Officer, I welcome the Cabinet Secretary's statement and the £68 million the SNP Government will allocate in each of the next 2 years to mitigate the adverse impact of welfare reform. Clearly, this Government is working hard within its limited powers to protect the most vulnerable Scots from UK Government welfare
policy. Can we have a question, Mr Gibson?
Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary if any party has put to him specific proposals to increase funding in relation to welfare, and if so, has such a party indicated how such an increase will be funded, bearing in mind that such a proposal must be accompanied by a reduction within the same portfolio?
Cabinet Secretary.
As always, Mr Gibson, as convener of the Finance Committee, gets right to the heart of the matter on these questions by asking the hard questions of people as to where the money will come from to afford the propositions that they come forward. Now, Mr Gray is correct. This is a draft budget. It is here for discussion. We are perfectly happy to have that discussion, as I have with parties in every year in the parliamentary budget process. But I do think it is important that when people are wanting us to spend money on different and additional priorities, they should come here and tell us where the money is coming from to do so.
Willie Rennie, followed by Jenny Mara.
Can I thank the Finance Secretary for an early sight of the statement? He knows that we'll work with him in a constructive way to amend his budget. But remarkably, he makes no mention at all in his statement about the rise in unemployment today. Instead, he calls it a budget for independence. It's the wrong priorities, the wrong choices, and it's an inadequate response. I mean, look at the colleges. Since 2009, 80,000 part-time places have been cut, and his budget goes nowhere near repairing that damage. If you look at, there's fewer Scottish businesses have apprenticeships than anywhere else in the United Kingdom. The UK Government's £2,000 cut in national insurance should be promoted by the Scottish Government to recruit more apprentices. And I'm disappointed. I am disappointed repeatedly by his stubborn refusal to adopt our cost aid and our cost aid plans for 24,000 families with 2-year-old children. The Education Committee heard yesterday about the benefits that this could deliver for families. So on colleges, on apprentices, on 2-year-olds, will the Finance Secretary agree to look again at his plans?
Cabinet Secretary.
Again, I'm a bit surprised by Mr Rennie's observations about unemployment, because I think the explanation I would give on the unemployment situation today, if colleagues look at the detail of the statistics, is that there's a very substantial fall in economic inactivity in Scotland, which was people going back into the labour market, some of whom were successful in securing employment and entering the labour market, and a large number of whom have not been successful in achieving unemployment. But over the 12 months, unemployment is down 19,000, which I would have thought would have been welcomed. Indeed, the Secretary of State for Scotland, who the last time I looked was a colleague of Mr Rennie, was welcoming the unemployment position in Scotland today. So perhaps Mr Moore is slightly more authoritative on these questions than Mr Rennie. On the question of college places, of course, the point is what I said to Mr Brown. We've maintained the full-time equivalent numbers because the courses that we are supporting and providing in the college sector are designed to enable people to get back into employment. That's why we've had a rise in employment in Scotland. That's why we've had a fall in unemployment over the last 12 months. On modern apprenticeships, the government is, and I've just announced the extension of the funding into 2015-16 of the 25,000 modern apprenticeships. Now, of course, all of these things just become very familiar because the government keeps on delivering them. When we came to office, when Mr Rennie's colleagues left office, modern apprenticeships weren't at 25,000 in Scotland, they were at 16,000, and we've increased them very substantially and sustained that over a long number of years. On his point about promoting UK schemes, I'm very happy to. I work very collaboratively with the Secretary of State in the Scottish Employability Forum on promoting UK schemes. I'm unaware of any complaint the Secretary of State for Scotland has about how the Scottish Government goes about supporting joint working on employment. Indeed, after the Scottish Employability Forum last week, the Secretary of State for Scotland issued a tweet about how constructive the meeting had been between myself and himself at the Scottish Employability Forum. And I was delighted to see his little tweet on that question. It was more encouraging than Mr Rennie's statement to Parliament. And the final point is on the issue of childcare. The Government has just announced a significant expansion of £190 million of provision in childcare in Scotland. Is it not within Mr Rennie's good grace to welcome that investment in Parliament today?
Before I call Jenny Mara, can I say to members, I have got 16 members, all of whom wish to ask a question of the Finance Secretary. I want to get through all of them. So can I give some guidance to members? Cut out the preamble, one question, we'll get through it, because if you don't keep to that, you're going to be disadvantaging your own members. Jenny Mara, followed by Aileen MacLeod.
Presiding Officer, let me tell the Cabinet Secretary who...
We just got a question, Ms Mara. Can we get a question? A question, Ms Mara.
Who thinks that Scotland is on pause? The 32,000 extra young people who have become unemployed this summer. Presiding Officer, Cabinet Secretary, what is your budget doing to address that?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, what the Government's budget is doing is it's providing 25,000 modern apprenticeships, which, of course, is, as I've just said to Mr Rennie, significantly higher than the numbers we inherited from the government that Ms Mara would have been a supporter of all those years ago in 2007 when they were defeated. Secondly, we have put in place the Opportunities for All guarantee, which assures every 16 to 19-year-old of a training or education opportunity if they are unable to find one or unable to find work. That's what the Government is doing to support young people with the steps and the measures in place to ensure that they can access the labour market and fulfil their potential.
Aileen MacLeod, followed by James Kelly.
Presiding Officer, we now know that a majority of Scots want to see the Scottish Parliament
Can we get a question, please?
of decisions over the economy and welfare. So can the Finance Secretary outline what he would have been able to do differently with the budget if he'd had those powers? Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the point that Aileen MacLeod makes is an important one about the flexibility and powers that we would have had if we had we were an independent country. For one, we would not have legislated to have the bedroom tax. We would never have brought that forward. For two, the Government would have taken a different approach on capital expenditure than the UK Government has taken to ensure that we didn't have the type of economic difficulties extended as we have had them extended by the failed economic policies of the current United Kingdom Government. And that's just two examples of what the Government would have done.
James Kelly, followed by Chick Brodie.
Can the Cabinet Secretary confirm that the cut in rail services detailed in page 128 of the budget documentation is as a result of the delay to the Egypt project as discovered in the recent Audit Scotland report on infrastructure projects?
Cabinet Secretary.
There is no change to the capital programme in relation to Egypt or what the Government has previously announced. The funding settlement that's in the budget provides fully and adequately for the Government's ability to run the rail, to financially support the running of the rail services in Scotland and to invest in the programmes that we have already committed to.
Chick Brodie, followed by John Mason.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Will the Finance Secretary join me in welcoming the latest ONS figures today showing Scotland...
Can we get a question, Mr Brodie?
I'm coming to it. Higher employment and youth employment in the UK. Does he agree that this is further proof that the Scottish Government is doing the best it can with the economic powers it has, and that only a yes vote next September will give Scotland the chance to break away from the Chancellor's austerity programme?
Cabinet Secretary.
I think what I've tried to do in my statement was to give Parliament some dispassionate context based on factual information about what has happened since I last came to Parliament with a budget 12 months ago. 12 months ago, I came here and said that my priority was to improve economic conditions in Scotland. 12 years on, any dispassionate observer of the statistics that I have given to Parliament would say that the Government has made progress. It is not the end of the journey, it is what the Government is able to do. But of course, if we had the full range of economic and fiscal powers, Mr McNeill, we would be able to do a great deal more than what the Government is able to do in the constraints in which we operate today.
John Mason, followed by Neil Bibby.
This year the budget was cut by the UK Government by £107 million immediately before it was implemented. Has there been any explanation about that and any guarantee it will not happen again next year? Cabinet Secretary.
Mr Mason will be aware that during the financial year in 2013-14 we have had an in-year reduction in our budget. That has never happened in any year in which I have been the Finance Minister, and I don't actually, when I think about it, I can't imagine it has ever happened under devolution. And we also had a reduction of £125 million in our resource budget in 2014-15, applied by the UK Government. Now, I took a decision that I would not pass on any of the financial impact of that to local government in Scotland. So the local government settlement that I proposed in 13-14, which I set out as an indicative plan, for example, in 14-15, has been fulfilled by the statement that I have made to Parliament today. That's the way in which I think is appropriate for us to deal with these questions. As for guarantees about future reductions, I have no such guarantees. So if it's happened already, then I cannot rule out the fact that it might happen again. Although what is clear from the spending round announcement on the in late June is that there will be further reductions in public expenditure in 2016-2017 and 2017-18.
Neil Bibby, followed by Maureen Watt.
Mr Swinney has said he's increasing the budget for colleges in 2015-16. Can you confirm whether or not, Mr Swinney, this represents a real terms cut to college funding in 2015-16?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, if Mr Bibby will recall, I gave a guarantee to Parliament that there would be a funding arrangement of £522 million put in place for 13-14 and 14-15. I have fulfilled that as terms of my commitment, and I have increased that to £526 million in 2015-16. So I think Mr Bibby would be well served to welcome the increased resources the Government is putting into the college sector.
Maureen Watt, followed by Malcolm Chisholm.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Cabinet Secretary confirm that the Scottish Government will continue its commitment to 1,000 extra police officers on the street, helping to deliver record low levels of crime?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, that remains a commitment of the Government. The visible and strong police presence around the country has contributed significantly towards the reduction in crime levels in Scotland, and the commitment that the Government has given is fulfilled by the financial settlement we have put in place as part of the budget today.
Malcolm Chisholm, followed by Annabel Ewing.
Can the Cabinet Secretary explain why in the sections of his speech on economic recovery and support for business he omitted to mention that the enterprise, energy and tourism budget will decline from £479 million this year to £444 million next year? And since our next debate is about enterprise bodies, can he tell us how the focus of those bodies will be affected for good or ill by the transfer of £41.8 million from resource to capital?
Cabinet Secretary.
On the question of the budget line that Mr Chisholm refers to, contains the expenditure on the enterprise networks and also on energy projects. And as I explained in my statement, I've extended the National Renewables Investment Fund for an extra 12 months because of the fact that it has been difficult to get renewable energy projects agreed because of the uncertainty over UK energy policy. So the factor that accounts for the decline in the budget in 2014-15 that Mr Chisholm highlights is essentially arises out of a change to the energy line within that overall line. The enterprise networks are broadly consistent between 13-14 and 14-15, and there is an increase in energy expenditure in 15-16 representing the fact that projects are taking longer to be agreed because of the uncertainty over UK energy policy. In relation to the wider role of the enterprise networks, as I'm sure Mr Ewing will set out in the debate that follows, are focused on the support to the company sector to assist their development and to ensure that the government's objectives on internationalising business, on securing the opportunities in the low-carbon economy and on the work in the key sectors, which we saw some very good evidence about this week in relation to the success of the food and drink sector, are able to be fulfilled as a result of the positive involvement of the enterprise companies.
Annabel Ewing, followed by Mary Scanlon.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The savings being delivered by the Queensferry Crossing project are, of course, very welcome indeed. And can the Finance Secretary expand upon the continued opportunities for local businesses as part of this vital infrastructure project for the Kingdom of Fife? And can he provide some detail on how this saving could be reallocated?
Cabinet Secretary.
In terms of the revised estimates that we published, this arises essentially out of the fact that the project is progressing well and the contract was structured around essentially a level of contingency risk that that ran alongside a fixed price contract. As the elements of risk are being addressed and dealt with, as I saw yesterday at the Queensferry Crossing, we are able to release those savings, and our latest estimate is that will total £145 million. We have, of course, allocated some of those resources already in 2 tranches, totalling £45 million. Other reallocations have been undertaken to support the infrastructure priorities of the Government, which, of course, extend across a range of different areas, particularly the very substantive boost to the housing sector, which I'm sure is welcomed around the country.
Mary Scanlon, followed by Claudia Beamish.
Thank you. The college sector pension deficit was £115 million last year, an increase of 93% on the previous year and more than 10 times the deficit in 2007. What assurances can the Cabinet Secretary give to staff in the college sector who are rightly concerned about their pensions?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the issues in relation to the management of college pensions are entirely a matter for the governing bodies of individual colleges, and they must exercise the prudential judgment and management around the sustainability of the pension funds. That is their responsibility constitutionally to do so.
Claudia Beamish, followed by Patrick Harvie.
Thank you. While there is some additional funding for peatlands and active travel, what reassurances can the Cabinet Secretary give that all the policies and proposals in the RPP2 relevant to this budget are fully costed so as to allow us to move forward incrementally, and that he has secured further funding for the carbon assessment tool so that a more effective carbon assessment of the budget can be undertaken to include second-round emissions?
Cabinet Secretary.
I would say to Claudia Beamish that, along with and I didn't make reference to this in the budget statement, but the carbon assessment of the 2014-15 budget is published. Obviously, I think this would be, Mr Harvie and I have discussed this on many occasions over the last few years. This is an innovative area of policy making and assessment, so the Government is very open to suggestions from across the chamber as to how we can strengthen the carbon assessment of the budget. I think what we have is an approach which is getting stronger and more effective over time, but as I say, I'm very happy to engage in discussion about how we can strengthen that. In relation to financial commitments and policy commitments, the commitments I've set out in the budget are the funded commitments of the Scottish Government. They emerge out of the report on policies and proposals, and of course the Environment Minister, Paul Wheelhouse, told Parliament that the Government would come back and boost the financial support that was here for RPP measures, and that's exactly what we've done this afternoon.
Patrick Harvie, followed by Kevin Stewart.
if the government intends to raise active travel up its agenda, which would be welcome after the very many tragedies that we've seen, what are we to make of a statement which commits 60 million on active travel over the next 2 years, but a budget line on sustainable and active travel which commits only 44, as well as other opaque budget lines such as the Future Transport Fund? Isn't it time for a single, clear, transparent budget line on active travel so that everybody looking at these documents knows what the government intends to spend public money on?
Cabinet Secretary.
I have some sympathy with the position that Mr Harvey articulates, because there are, I accept that in the budget documents there can be elements of expenditure that appear in different policy areas. And what I have to try to manage is a balance between ensuring that Parliament can see the structure of the budget on a comparative basis year by year in a fashion that Parliament generally believes to be acceptable, and the portfolio approach is essentially, by agreement with the Finance Committee, the way in which the budget should be set out. I'm quite happy on other occasions, and in the light of the point that Mr Harvey has raised with me, I'm quite happy to marshal some of the information in a clearer fashion which identifies the support that's in place on cycling, and to provide that to him and to place that in spice. I'll do that in the light of the question that he's raised this afternoon, because there are different elements of budgets that come in from different portfolios that contribute towards what I think is an approach on cycling which is stronger and better and more effective than was the case in the previous provisions that I brought to Parliament. So I have acknowledged and accepted that we needed to do more to encourage cycling activity. We've done that in the budget, and I'll happily share that evidence and analysis with Mr Harvey and with Parliament.
Kevin Stewart, followed by Anne McTaggart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Cabinet Secretary pointed out that Westminster are imposing a cut of over 18% to local governments south of the border. I welcome the Scottish Government recognising the need to protect local services. Can the Finance Secretary expand on how local government spending is being protected in this budget, including through additional funding for early years?
Cabinet Secretary.
The Government's set out the funding priority that we attach to early years education. We think that the measures that we have in place to extend the number of hours that 3- and 4-year-olds and looked after 2-year-olds are able to access early years education and support is an important part of ensuring that provision is in place. We will also be looking at working with our local authority partners in the implementation of the Children and Young People Bill to find the best and the most effective way to ensure that that investment can be deployed to create the outcome that I was suggesting, or the two outcomes I was suggesting, of improved early learning opportunities for young people, but also to encourage greater participation in the labour market by more and more women.
Anne McTaggart, followed by Ken McIntosh.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. Cabinet Secretary, this is another significant real terms reduction in resource grant for local government. Will this not inevitably result in more job losses on top of the 37,000 jobs already lost under this government?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I can appreciate the issues that Anne McTaggart raises. I simply would point out to her that local government in Scotland has been very fairly treated by the Scottish Government compared to local government south of the border. Up until 2012-13, the Government had received an increase in its budget of about 6.4%, and local government got an increase of 8.9%. And that indicates that local government did better out of the budget than the Scottish Government did. Now, of course, Anne McTaggart is free to argue that local government should get more money. So I'll look forward to the Labour Party coming forward with the proposal in the budget which says how much more money local government is going to get. But I gently point out that every year the Labour Party has come to Parliament and complained about the level of funding for local government, they have never, in private to me or as part of the budget negotiations, ever advanced an argument for giving local government more money. I look forward to that being changed this year, but I just point out that in all the years I've been Finance Minister, I have never been asked to give more money to local government by the Labour Party as part of the budget negotiations.
Ken McIntosh, followed by Margaret MacDonald.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary whether he will provide Parliament with further information on what is included in the 5% cap on his revenue-funded investment programme? For example, would the local authority contribution to an NPD schools project be included in that 5% cap?
Cabinet Secretary. Well, I think there's a comprehensive amount of information that's available in the budget document. I've put two new annexes into the budget document that give a whole host of information. They're in there at page 168 is Annex A and Annex B is page 171. There's a substantive amount of information that sets out what is in the government's 5% framework, and I certainly would be very happy to discuss those issues with Parliament, but the information is in the budget document.
Margaret MacDonald, then finally Jim Eadie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I was glad to hear the Cabinet Secretary give such a wholehearted endorsement of the public ownership of water. I wonder, could we have a step for a hint in the next draft of the budget as to how he feels about the ownership of the new natural, please excuse me, the renewables industries which are now being developed? Are they going to be in public ownership also?
Cabinet Secretary.
One of the aspects of the legislative changes that we're bringing forward in relation to the water industry is to enable Scottish Water to be a more active player in the development of renewable energy measures, and as a consequence of its ownership by the government, then clearly these investments will be part of the public assets of the Scottish Government. So in that respect, then I can give Margaret MacDonald some comfort in her answer. Clearly, there's a lot of other investment that's made in the renewable energy sector that's undertaken by private companies. The Government has no proposals to change that arrangement. But clearly, having a strong and positive policy framework that supports the development of the renewable energy industry in Scotland is, I think, a strong advantage for the Government in Scotland.
Jim Eadie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that an additional £20 million for cycling is one that will be widely welcomed by cycling organisations throughout Scotland as a very welcome investment? This is not an accident, but has come about as a result of a government that is willing to listen and act upon the concerns expressed by cyclists in Scotland.
Cabinet Secretary.
I appreciate Mr Eadie's comments. Mr Eadie has been vociferous, along with Alison Johnson, in coming to see me about issues around cycling and cycling investment, and I'm glad that we've been able to make some progress on this question in the budget settlement. I think there are opportunities for us to ensure that this money is used effectively to strengthen cycling infrastructure in Scotland, and I give Parliament the assurance that Ministers will be keen to do so as part of the discussions around the budget and the implementation of the commitments we've made.
Thank you. That ends the statement from the Cabinet Secretary.